Hello and welcome to a kind of hangout and paint video. So you've hopefully already remembered Michael for some of my previous videos.
Hi.
You may recall I did a video about Games Workshop army deals, and in particular the path that kind of led us through all the way back from 2nd edition 40k and the army starter sets that they did back then, all the way through to the combat patrol boxes that Games Workshop are producing now. Well, I said I'd be doing some more videos about combat patrol, and this is the first of them. The idea behind this is Michael and I have each got a combat patrol. Got Michael's, he's got the Eldar one, freshly built and undercoated, and I have got myself a Necron one, all built and undercoated. The idea behind this video is we're just going to hang out with you guys, really. So I'm going to be painting my Necrons, Michael's going to be painting his Eldar, and we're just going to chat about painting techniques, about the background of the different armies. I'm going to, for example, be giving Michael a bit of an education on the Necrons, because they came out after he stopped playing 40k.
Yep.
And yeah, this is going to be kind of one of those videos where hopefully my overly excitable, babbling yang is balanced out by Michael's chill, calm yin. And we get a nice and relaxing video for you to just kind of hang out and paint to. So please, at the end of this, let me know in the comments what you've been painting while you've watched this video. Right, well, without further ado, let's get down to it. So, first things first, I need something to stick my images on. I am using a very old kitchen tile covered in decades of used paint. Michael, on the other hand, is using a slightly more high-tech approach.
Yeah, a plate with a bit of kitchen paper and, sadly, what's this called? Baking parchment or whatever. It used to always be white, but now I think for environmental reasons it's brown, which is much worse for painting, so I need to try and find some.
But still, you are using an improvised wet palette, which is a big step up from my... as I learned to paint back when I was working for Games Workshop, we just used to literally buy back a pack of square white tiles and just use those as palettes, and I've never grown out of it. I think this one, I think the last time it was cleaned, my daughter was still in nappies. Yeah, there is caked on decades of paint on this one, but hey. So first things first, just probably talk a little bit about what colour schemes we're going for. I am painting my Necrons to match my previously existing Necron army. I'm going to quickly cut over to the close-up cam so you can see how these look. These were Necrons I painted, I think, around about the time the 5th edition Necron Codex came out. And I kind of went for my own unique improvised colour scheme. I mean, it dates it somewhat that the scarabs are all press moulded to match the little tiny scarabs that came inside the Tomb Spider model. Whereas now I will be painting some of these, the newer plastic scarabs that you get in the Combat Patrol box. But yeah, so mine are kind of going a dark green and black with bone heads. And I just start off, therefore, I have sprayed all of my Necron warriors lead belcher, basically. So yeah, they've just been given a simple spray of lead belcher, and I'm about to go over and darken all the metal before I start adding the main colours on. My choice for darkening is usually Null Oil, but I've read good things about using some of the contrast paints, in particular Basilican Grey, for darkening metal, so I'm going to give that a go. Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about what colour scheme you're painting your Eldar?
So I spent a long time trying to work out what colour scheme to do, helped partly by Ben saying what Crafts World really exists, or there is lore for, and I was inspired by one of the armies at the 5th edition event that we went to earlier in the year, Graham's Chaos Army, which was a gorgeous purple, gold and cream army.
And pink! Lots of pink!
And Ben said, well, there is a Craft World that's kind of like that. So I've ended up with Altensar, and then, so it's going to be kind of burgundy gold bone on the faceplates. And after I painted the first two guys of this, I went and I dig out some of my old 80s and 90s Eldar, and I'd forgotten, but I've actually got this Eldar Dreadnought from as it was at the time, but I've actually painted pinky purple anyway, so obviously this is like just in my bones, so that's what colour I want to paint elves. So maybe I need some dark elves next.
Ooh, some Drukhari. Yeah, so Craftworld Altensar. So you've looked up some different painting guides for doing these guys, have you?
Yeah, so I think there's an official one, how official it is, which is black base, so this is Chaos Black I've primed them with, Galvorback Red as a base, and then I've got Screamer Pink and Pink Horror, and I've tried a couple of tester models, one of which I did with kind of edge highlighting and one of which I dry brushed, and I actually prefer the one that ends up with dry brushing and then a bit of edge highlighting. I think the blend looks nicer, so I'm going to try going for that again. I think I want another good test model because the first two I'm not completely happy with, and then we'll see where we go from there.
And I think that's the White Dwarf colour scheme. Actually, I think that was, they did do. I don't know if you read. They did do an article in White Dwarf. I think it was during 8th edition about Craft World Altansar, kind of the full background, updated background for them. I've got that White Dwarf somewhere. Once I can find out which White Dwarf it is, and perhaps I can crowdsource this. If you know which White Dwarf they featured the index about Altansar in, let me know in the comments, because it will save me having to wade through all those White Dwarfs, and I can then dig it out, and Michael can have a read of it. But yeah, they Altansar first made their reappearance during the Eye of Terror campaigns. I mean, tying back into something we talked about in one of my previous campaign videos. Yeah, they were kind of rumoured to be the Lost Craftwood. I think it was one of those ones of when they were talking in Second Ed Eldar, the background for Morgan Ra, one of the Phoenix Lords. Yep. They said about him escaping from Craftworld Altansar just before it slipped into the Eye of Terror. And it was, I think, during the Eye of Terror campaign that they suddenly decided to reveal that in actual fact Altansar was not lost. It was like Ulthwé plus. Like if Ulthwé was dabbling around at the edges of the Eye of Terror, Altansar was literally on the event horizon of the Great Eye and needed that little bit of a push to pull it back out. And that was one of the kind of the side narratives that they produced as part of the Eye of Terror campaign, which I thought was quite cool. Was it wasn't just kind of, you know, humans versus humans. They actually also threw in their background for the Eldar. And yeah, and spoiler alert, it made it out, and thus now it is a kind of a craft world that's got its own kind of background and colour scheme, and at one point it even had its own rules. When they were doing all the different craft worlds, all had their own rules. That was that White Dwarf index that Craft World Altansar got its own rules.
So what was, if you can remember, what was the specific rules about Altansar? What kind of theme did they have?
Well, that's it. Unfortunately, I can't remember. I remember one of the bits of background about it was that other Eldar viewed Altansar with suspicion under the heading of you can't really kind of stay that close to the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years without bad things happening to you. Yeah. And it was also kind of accentuated by the fact that Eldar from Craftworld Altansar very rarely take their helmets off, and not in the company of, you know, other Eldar from other craft worlds, which screams the kind of, oh no, we're all horribly mutated albinos or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of those nice little kind of tweaks that they gave into the background of the Eldar from that.
So they're kind of Eldar Mandalorians.
Oh, yes, that's it. This is the way. Clearly you need to do, you know, have a Mando Autarch.
I did consider for these Guardians, I've got, because I've got a High Elf army as well, which you know has been being roundly thrashed multiple times.
It will win a game at some point.
It will, it needs a better general. So I've got, I've also started, there's a theme here which people might spot. I've also started a bit of a Wood Elf army. So I've got a couple of boxes of Eternal Guardians, Eternal Guard?
Mm-hmm.
Eternal Guard. And I've used them because I'm trying to get my daughter to play, and she loves Wood Elves. So I consulted with her on the build, and I've used the hooded heads.
They are cool heads.
So rather than, which is for the other variant, I can't remember what the other unit is that you can make. So I've got all of the actual Eternal Guard heads, and I did consider sticking them on so that they've got, because I thought they would look quite cool. But I really like the classic Guardian helmets.
They are very nice.
So it's also good that coincidentally works with the lore.
Well, if they showed their face, then they'd have to kill you.
Yeah, which would make a nice change for elves commanded by me.
Yeah, this is true.
So I think like it would be. So I haven't played 40k since 2nd edition.
Mm-hmm.
When we were talking about painting up these combat patrols, we said that could be a good intro to actually have a game with them once we finish doing it. So be well up for that.
Yeah, we'll do a video at some point, essentially the two of us properly learning how to play 10th edition 40k with our combat patrol boxes. I think that'd be awesome fun.
Wait, go on.
No, it's fine. What I was going to say was, if at some point I'm also going to introduce you to Battlefleet Gothic, because I've got an Eldar fleet for Battlefleet Gothic. Those of you who've watched my previous Battlefleet Gothic video, you'll see the Eldar fleet that I was building whilst horribly, horribly ill. And yeah, in Battlefleet Gothic, Eldar are one of the kind of hot armies to beat. So maybe that's one of the ways where at some point we can give you an army of elves and you can actually win a game.
Well, let's hope they're really good then. I hear they're good in 10th as well.
Supposedly, I mean, I've only played the one game of 10th. I played on my birthday against Sean and Marcus. And yeah, we had a lot of fun. But it was one of those ones that it was quite late and I had been drinking. And I started to fall asleep a little bit halfway through. So I'm really looking forward to getting some more games of 10th in, because it does look like it's a really fun edition. And it looks like it plays quite fast as well.
That's good.
But so, yeah, you last played during 2nd edition, and I think actually when you played it was the kind of the beginning of 2nd edition as well, wasn't it? It wasn't like late 2nd edition.
Yeah, I think so. I probably stopped playing around 93, 94, something like that.
Yeah, so I think that was still relatively early 2nd edition. So, Necrons, do you know anything about the Necrons?
Undead robot guys?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of the gist of them, yeah. Necrons were introduced in 2nd edition, which is why I asked about the point at which you stopped playing in 2nd edition.
Yeah, they weren't around, definitely.
They were only at that point ever available with like White Dwarf rules. So I think, testing my knowledge here, I think White Dwarf 218 was the first appearance of the Necrons, because they gave one away free on the cover. I've still got my free Necron somewhere. It's in a box along with all the other odds and sods from that era that I just haven't ever thrown away. But they were metal, and they only came with like a limited number of poses. But the design aesthetic hasn't changed that much. I think they've just kind of become less blocky and more kind of skeletal, if I can put it in those terms. So the original one was a big kind of blocky, square-jawed robot with a very obviously kind of slightly Terminator-esque but cartoony robot skull head.
Yeah.
And then they all had kind of ankhs on their chests, so kind of giving it an Egyptian overtone to them. Because I guess the best way I can describe Necrons is they are kind of the Tomb Kings, the undead of the Warhammer world. If the Eldar are the space elves, and the orcs are very obviously the orcs, the Votan squats are the dwarves, Necrons are your undead. But very particularly the kind of the Tomb Kings, Mummy Tomb Kings, style of undead. But when they were first released in 2nd edition, they were only kind of listed as this kind of this new threat. So I suppose in the same way that the Tyranids first made an appearance as kind of the Gene Stealers, as being this unknown threat that was coming in and, you know, invading via space hulks and stuff. The Necrons were only ever at that point marketed as the Necron Raiders, and they were these weird kind of undead robots that would come out of out of nowhere, attack like, you know, a colony world or something, and essentially steal all kind of the inhabitants. So their guns were described as these kind of flaying weapons, which is still what they're called today. They're called Gauss flayers. But the idea was that they would kind of peel away the layers of something, whether it was flesh or you know, metal, breaking it down into its component atoms. And much like the Tyranids would kind of come in and steal biomass, the Necrons would come in and steal, well, people, technology, just dissolve them into their component atoms and then vanish again as mysteriously as they'd first arrived. And the only models that they had in 2nd edition, in the White Dwarf rules, were the Necron Warriors, or Necron Raiders as they were called, the Necron Lord, who had a weird kind of funny sticky-up forehead and a staff with an ankh on the end, called the Staff of Light, which is still one of the weapons that you can take for Necron Army today, albeit it just doesn't have a big ankh on the end of it. They've not quite so heavily leaned into that part of the background. And then there was the Necron Destroyers, which were these kind of essentially floating armchairs with a big cannon on it and a Necron sitting in the armchair, like a Barker lounger zooming through space. But yeah, that was their kind of their anti-tank thing at that point. Oh, and Scarabs. Even then, they still had little Scarabs, little kind of robot Scarab beetles. Albeit they were huge. I mean, they were like bigger than a Space Marine backpack back then. They're still pretty big now, but they're not quite as big at least. But yeah, so they featured in White Dwarf. They got one battle report, which I've done a video about. It was in White Dwarf 218, and I did a video about it. So that means that they didn't first appear in 218. They must have first appeared earlier than that. But never mind. Yeah, 218 was one where they had their first battle report against Sisters of Battle, which has kind of become fairly infamous in the background. The attack on Sanctuary 101. That's really kind of codified into Warhammer lore as well. So whenever the Imperium talk about kind of the first recorded encounter with the Necrons, that's the occasion that they refer to.
So I don't remember Sisters of Battle being a thing either. So they must have also come out later in.
Yeah, they came out in second edition. They at least got their own codex with amazing cover art by John Blanche. The incredibly impractical Sister of Battle, complete with high-heeled boots. That is now available as a model. You can actually get it as one of the Canoness models. I've got it as the Canoness for my army. I'll show you when we're off camera. But yeah, so Necrons, they kind of first had their big encounter with the Imperium there. There was a game around that time called Gorka Morka, which I'm a big fan of.
You've mentioned that a few times.
I have mentioned it a few times. We're going to have to play a game of it at some point. Little overtones of kind of Dark Future, because it is all kind of racing and zooming around the place. But also, it's very much kind of second edition Necromunda-esque in terms of its gangs and mobs. But so in the background art for that, when they were all kind of showing pictures of these deserts that the orcs were racing around in their trucks, they had kind of weird metallic skulls loitering here and there in piles, and there were these massive black stone pyramids in the middle of the desert that had survived the crashing of the Orc Hulk. And the implication there was he was kind of implying, well, maybe this is where these Necron raiders have come from.
Right.
They've built massively on the background for that since then. But so, Necrons then got their first codex in 3rd edition. They were one of the two armies that kind of new codices. Them and the Tau got new codices back then. And that established what was believed to be the Necron lore at that time. They've kind of retconned that lore since then, and I'll come back to that. But the lore is established in the 3rd ed, going into 4th ed codex, was that the Necrons were an ancient people. They were one of the 2 oldest races in the galaxy. They were from before even kind of the rise of the Chaos Gods, before the fall of the Eldar, before the rise of the Eldar Empire. There had been the Necrons, but they were called back then the Necrontia. And they had this really cool kind of background element to it, which was they referred to it as the War in Heaven. And basically, it ties into some of the kind of the Warhammer fantasy background, like the Slan, the Space Frogs. There was this idea that there were 2 races that were predominant in the galaxy back then. One known as the Old Ones, and the other the Necrontia. And the Old Ones came from a world that was, filled with gold and light, and everything was perfect, and within a matter of 1,000 years they'd uncovered the secret to immortality and were exploring the galaxy and were creating new races to help them kind of populate the galaxy and make it this wonderful, peaceful, harmonious place. The other race was the Necrontia, who were born around a star that emitted a deadly radiation, which meant that most of them didn't make it to like 30. And that they worshipped as this kind of dark god. And it actually became clear that the reason, in fact, why their star was so horrible was that it had a star god that was kind of this stellar deity being that was feeding on the stellar radiation and also feeding on their deaths and suffering. And they decided to essentially strike a deal with this entity. In exchange for power and immortality, they would give up their fleshy forms and serve it. And that then became the War in Heaven. So they kind of went out into the galaxy and decided they were going to hate everybody, hate the Old Ones, try and destroy them. And the suggestion is that the advent of Psykers into the galaxy, which eventually led to the opening of the Warp and the Eye of Terror, is caused by the fact that the Necrons were completely psychically blank, and the Old Ones needed a weapon that they couldn't fight. And so they invented Psykers, and the Eldar being, of course, the predominant psychic race. And in so doing, birthed the Warp, and brought about kind of the Age of Darkness that we found ourselves in now. And eventually, the Old Ones died out. Eventually, the Necrons essentially went into stasis. They pretended that they died out. So that you've just dropped your brush.
Throwing a brush on myself.
They pretended that they died out so that the old ones would think they'd won, and went into these kind of massive stasis vaults underneath these Blackstone pyramids on dead worlds out in the void, and yeah, the old ones eventually kind of evolved into higher beings and left this plane and left behind the kind of the races that they had altered, like the Eldar, like the Krork, as they were introduced, a warrior race that had been introduced as a battle form to help fight against the Necrontyr. And it's suggested is the origin of the Orcs.
Sounds like a very human view of history to blame the Eldar for the opening of the Eye of Terror.
Well, given that the Eldar were the reason why Slaanesh was created, and the birth of Slaanesh is what ripped open the Eye of Terror, I think we can quite conclusively blame the Eldar for the Eye of Terror. The fact that it's now the Great Rift and is tearing the galaxy in half is entirely humanity's fault.
Exactly.
The Necrontyr, of course, are the ones who did nothing wrong. But so, yeah, the background as they introduced it then was that millions and millions of years later, after the old ones have died, the Eldar Empire has fallen, the Necrontyr kind of wake up, but they are enslaved still to these dark star gods. And in fact, the star gods themselves, after the old ones had gone, waged war against each other, devouring each other for their own, for the power. And there were only essentially 4 left. And in game, they actually gave you rules to use 2 of them. So the Nightbringer, who was basically this massive kind of Grim Reaper-looking entity, which is supposedly the origin of the image of the Grim Reaper as a symbol of death in basically every culture in the galaxy, as a race memory of the Nightbringer. And the Deceiver, who's like the ultimate trickster god. Then there were 2 others. One is simply known as the Outsider, who was said to have been banished outside the galaxy, or outside. We don't know outside where. Outside the galaxy, outside the galactic plane, outside into the warp. We don't know. He was just banished outside. And yeah, the other one is the Void Dragon, who is revealed to be, well, at least most of him, residing on Mars, and is the origin of the cults of the Tech Priests. That was the background for the Necrons for quite some time. I think that was all the way through 3rd and 4th edition. They were this slave race to these unknowable, terrible star gods who were essentially seeking to destroy all the other living things in the galaxy and feed them into these kind of massive furnaces, soul furnaces, to just feed their soul energy to the Catan star gods until the whole galaxy was consumed. I guess maybe Games Workshop felt that was a little bit too like the Tyranids, this whole kind of, consume the galaxy, and maybe it robbed the models that were the essential models of the range, the Necrons, of any agency. At that point they were really nothing more than just extensions of the Catan. So in 5th edition they basically claimed that actually no, that was the Imperium getting it all wrong, and that just because one of the first recorded encounters with the Necrons was this Space Marine, Ultramarines captain called Uriel Ventris. There's a whole novel about it called Nightbringer, which is very cool. But because his interaction had been with the Nightbringer, that's why the Imperium had decided that was, clearly the biggest, scariest thing is the boss.
Yeah.
And actually, no, the Catan merely would have been in charge, but the Necrons betrayed them, and the Catan now are essentially slaves to the Necrons. They are living weapons. And yeah, they completely rewrote the background of the Necrons. But I think actually what they rewrote it to is still as, if not more, cool.
There's a thing you said right at the beginning about their star pumping out deadly radiation, which is, of course, what all stars do.
Yes, but
including ours.
Particularly deadly radiation. Like, like a neutron star or something. I don't know enough about physics to say whether I'm talking bump or not. But yeah, it was...
I suspect neither did the writers of the law.
Doesn't matter, it's sci-fi. You don't have to be correct in order to be fun. But yeah, so the background of the Necrons as they stand now, and as they've stood since 5th edition, is still kind of similar. So there was still the whole War in Heaven thing, and they still gave up their mortal forms in exchange for these immortal robotic bodies. But whilst it was still established that it was a trick by the Catan to get them to give up the most essential essence of themselves, their souls, for want of a better word. The change in the lore is that the Necrons were not fools, or not completely anyway, and they were always planning on betraying the Catan. And yeah, once they became clear that they kind of won the war in heaven, they attacked the Catan and shattered them into all these kind of tiny shards. So they're not their full Star God potent selves, they're just a tiny fraction of their selves. And then the fractions were then kind of locked inside these living metal T-1000 style bodies to serve as living weapons that the Necrons can unleash against their enemies. And those kind of take the form of either just literally shards that float across the battlefield attacking things, like the original Nightbringer or the Deceiver models, or the Void Dragon model that they released a very nice and pretty model for, or they were these kind of pure energy beings that would be trapped inside these massive vaults, the kind of floating obelisk pyramids that could then be opened and unleash the trans-dimensional power of these terrifying star gods. And yeah, that's kind of been the background for the Catan and the Necrons ever since then. And then they've expanded on that in some pretty awesome novels where they've essentially established that becoming a Necron, as opposed to a Necrontyr, was not a voluntary process. It was a decree from their kind of overall ruling king that all Necrontyr would submit to the furnaces of biotransference. All of them would give up their flesh for living metal. And it turns out it was a horrible mistake, that something crucial, something unknowable was lost in the process. Most of them would now like to try and get that back, but they can't, because what was once got there is now gone. And also there are very few, options for viable host DNA to make new Necrontyr bodies for them even to go into. But also the only Necrons that have kind of consciousness, for want of a better word, are the nobles. The rank in which you held within Necrontyr society, so if you were a peasant or a soldier, you got a weaker form of a body, so you got one of these as your body, compared to if you were a member of a ruling dynasty, you got a much fancier body with better kind of encoded protocols, better abilities, and a greater ability to recall who you were and maintain a degree of sentience.
And a cool metal scarf, apparently.
Yeah, lots of dangly kind of, I don't know what they're called, like a vicar wears. Is it called a surplice? I don't know what they're called. Yeah, the dangly things that the vicars wear around their necks. That's a nice little kind of trope, albeit it's made out of kind of segmented metal rather than out of cloth, because it would have decayed millennia ago.
So what are you up to when you're painting at the moment?
So I'm just desperately going through darkening down all the steel. Anything that's going to remain as, eventually, probably, ironically, shiny metal at the end, I'm going through at the moment and washing everything with Basilica Grey to get them to be dark kind of metal. Then I'm going to go back over with a shiny metal and dry brush the metal again.
Cool.
Yeah. Then finally I can go and paint all kind of the cool greens and like the white skulls and stuff on them.
So I said I was going to do one more test model, and what I'm actually doing is base coating all
You are
of the
batch
purple.
painting. You are batch painting all of the purple. So yeah, that's Galvor back red over the top first, is it?
That's it, yeah. And quite fast with a big brush, because anything I go over doesn't really matter because I'm going to paint over it in a minute, and the colours I've got are all pretty bold. So this is my least favourite bit of the process.
Yeah, I mean, base coating can be one of those like pain in the bum type elements because it just takes forever. But it is an essential, and it also doesn't look great when you're doing it. You can get demoralised, I suppose. I'm not normally a batch painter. That's very much the other Mike's territory. Blitzing through and painting, like 30 Skaven in an evening. I'm more on the lines of paint one model, then paint another model, then paint another model. Oh look, I've gotten bored because I've just painted 5 models and I want to paint something else now. Hobby Butterfly style.
Yeah.
Whereas, actually sitting down and batch painting an army is fairly unusual for me.
Well, because because you somehow tricked me into getting back into the hobby through making me have fun.
How dare I encourage you to have fun?
I ended up getting signed up for your 5th edition event and had 3 months to source and paint an army. So, what with everything else going on in real life, batch painting and just trying to get stuff done was. But I think it was quite good for me to just to have that bit of pressure to get you into the habit of, okay, let's get some models painted.
Having a goal to aim towards.
Exactly. I still nearly beat you. In fact, I did.
No, you did. You painted more models than I did in that amount of time. But to be fair, like the other Mike painted like 3 entire armies in the time. Either of us painted 1.
Yeah, and also you're it's much easier batch painting a unit than it is hand painting
individual heraldry
Bretonian knights.
Yeah, no more fancy individual heraldry armies for a while. Lots of stuff that is vaguely sticking to a formula is my next set of doing things. Like I've been painting, batch painting-ish a unit of 20 dwarf miners for our trip to Lee's 6th edition event in October. So I've kind of done armour and skin tones on those, and then it's going to be a case of going back and doing things like gloves and highlighting the skin and...
So you've gotten 3 colours already, so
yeah,
ready to play.
No, that's it. If I wanted to, I could just argue, hey, 3 colours and based, but I think a small part of my soul would die inside if I tried and did that. Don't know necessarily which bits of this are eventually going to end up green and which bits are going to stay silver, so for the minute I'm just going to paint huge swathes of this as if it's all going to stay silver. The big kind of Doomstalker type tripod looking thing, very much kind of War of the Worlds-esque looking thing. Yeah, paint a bunch of this as if it's all going to stay silver, and then I can always paint green over the top if I decide I want some of it to go green. But once I've done this, I can get my dry brush and move on to dry brushing any of the models that are dry. I'm supposed to be painting Nurgle stuff for my Age of Sigmar Frost in the Garden campaign, but I'm afraid I got, as ever, horribly distracted by that and started painting Lord of the Rings stuff. But that's hopefully going to lead to some more videos in the future, because I've been promising for ages. My friend Greg and I had been talking about doing something called the Fantasy Fellowship, where the idea behind that is you essentially do your own retelling of the Lord of the Rings story. And I've got a whole bunch of Lord of the Rings miniatures, and I'm looking forward to having my own little kind of fellowship painted up and trying them out against some of the kind of the scenarios that the real original fellowship faced and see how they do. But I know you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings, because you've got the Fall of Osgiliath box, didn't you?
Yeah, so I about again, everything's a long story. About 2 years ago, I discovered, 2 Christmases ago, one and a half maybe, discovered they made the Fellowship of the Ring box. So I bought that for my eldest daughter because she loves Lord of the Rings, is a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Just for her to, because they're really cool models, and it's a, I'd got her into painting. I've been painting, although not on kind of Warhammer stuff, I've been painting D&D models and stuff for board games. And so she was really interested in painting models. I was always on the lookout for like cheap models that small children could paint. But she loves Lord of the Rings, so I thought, well, this is a great set. It comes with all of the Fellowship.
Yeah.
You've probably got it, haven't you? In fact, you've been painting it today.
I haven't. The plastic Fellowship I do have. That's not my Fellowship. I got the original Metal Fellowship when it came out, and several other models since then. But I mean, I've got loitering behind me here. The Thorin's Company box, which has formed part of my Fantasy Fellowship.
So I also have that, but it hasn't been made yet. And then, classic. Ben said, "I've got the game for that. If you want to play sometime, we can show her the game." So we did that. It's a really good game, really fun, very like scales well, so you can play with a few models, play with loads. But we didn't have any baddies. So, and the Battle for Osgiliath set is really good value, as I guess all of those box sets are. Yeah, so at the weekend I was, a bit like you said, to do something a bit different. I was building ruins from that.
Oh,
which are really cool.
Cool.
But they're not fun to make.
No, no, they're probably still better than the cardboard terrain that used to be available.
Probably, yeah, but it's a lot of glue. That's why I ran out of glue building ruins.
Yeah, that'll do the trick.
You mentioned second edition was where I ended up. So I started with Road Trader, or first edition, I guess, as it wasn't called then. And in that, the Eldar, you were saying about the invaders. The Eldar were basically space pirates, and I think again it could be put down to Imperial misinterpretation of what was going on, but you've got small groups of pirates. They were basically equivalent to Guardians, really, all the different models. But in that you could basically equip all your different individual people with different equipment and things. So it had a lot more elements of role playing game than a war game really, and they stacked all the war game elements in through hundreds of episodes of editions of White Dwarf and extra bits of rules. But the original Space Pirate Eldar didn't interest me at all.
No interest, no love for the pirates.
No, I don't know why. Pirates are cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess fictional fun pirates are cool.
Yes.
And as you've seen on basically every game, I somehow end up with elves. So it was kind of disappointing. But back then I was playing. So in Warhammer Fantasy 3rd, I was playing orcs and goblins.
So you don't just play elves?
Only for the last 20 years. I haven't played anything. And then Marines, because all of the coolest stuff came out for the Marines, which it probably is still true today. Maybe not all of it.
They do tend to get the shiniest kit.
And they definitely had back then the most plastic kits, which means it was actually affordable to buy them. Most of the other ranges were pretty much all metal.
I think they still have the most plastic kits even now.
Yeah. So I also had some squats, not very many, because they were again weird set to collect. Too expensive. I didn't have enough money to actually buy.
Well, they were mostly metal, weren't they?
Possibly all metal. There might be one plastic kit eventually,
Arbiter Ian would know. Arbiter Ian will have almost undoubtedly done a video about whether or not there were any plastic squat kits.
Yeah, and also it depends what I could see in the shop when I was there on whatever day. So researching what models were around and stuff was much harder. Very much relying on what's in the pages of White Dwarf or what's in the people in the shop tell you there.
I mean, so there weren't craft worlds back then. That was something that came in with the second edition codex.
Yeah, so the second edition codex was great. They brought in the aspect warriors, which were really cool. Massively overpowered at the time, unusual.
Still pretty much overpowered.
New army, new massively overpowered stuff. So yeah, they were great, and aspect warriors were really cool. So I brought some of my aspect warriors. I can show you some, the ones I painted in the 90s.
Throw them up on the close-up cam.
And they still look really similar to how they do today. I mean, they're metal models, so they're fixed pose, monopose basically.
Mm-hmm.
There's not even many sculpts, but they really look the same as the new plastic kits. Hardly changed at all, I would say.
I think it's just maybe there's a little bit. I mean, for the ones that aren't plastic now, like the Dire Avengers and the like the Hand Banshees, I suppose there is a little bit more of kind of posability, but there's still only so many poses you can do of model holding gun in two hands, or, model leaping while brandishing a sword.
Yeah, but it feels like it's the same unit, slightly bigger, in different poses, but it's not any. They haven't massively diverged from that look. The same's true for Space Marines, really, except they took away the pointy marks.
Yeah, and they're all kind of bigger and chunkier and Primaris now. I'm slapping on some white. What's called a Wraith Bone at the moment as a base coat over the bits that I'm going to eventually hit up with. Heck's this one called Tesseract Glow. Yeah. One thing I realised about doing this is that when I did the original colour scheme for my Necrons, I had maybe 4 or 5 different paints that I used, and I just kind of blended and mixed and layered and did washes and stuff to blend it all together. There's a lot more paints available this time. It's kind of doing a lot of the work for me in many respects. It's just a case of getting paints out for this when I was getting the selection out of my kind of paint box of what paints I thought I'd need. And I'm kind of going, must be over 20 paints here. This is ridiculous. I'm going to looks like I'm fielding an army of paint pots, never mind Necrons.
Yeah. I've definitely, over the last 6 months, expanded my amount of paints massively, and I went and bought 3 to do these guys. So,
well, you don't. I mean, I'm fairly traditionalist. I tend to stick to GW only paints, whether or not there are better paints out there or not. I'm sure people in the comments will tell me there are better paints out there. There
are certainly cheaper paints out there.
There are certainly cheaper
paints
out there. Are as good. You've got some of the game colour paints there, haven't you?
Yeah. So when I was painting board game stuff, I just had the Vallejo game colour paints, which are really good. I think when you're painting Games Workshop stuff, they've got the paint for the scheme that you want.
Yeah.
They're obviously quite smart with that. But I really like the Vallejo paint. What I found is some of them are less good. That's also true of the Games Workshop paints.
Yeah.
Games Workshop ones are probably a bit more consistent. I've got also Army Painter speed paints.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a whole set of them, and they are, I would say, mostly good. Some of them are not as good, but the contrast paints.
Contrast paints are legendary.
Contrast paints are really good. Some of the speed paints are as good. They've got different. I've just got different colours, but they're a lot cheaper.
There was an amazing video over on the Painting Phase, Peachy's channel, I don't know if you watched, about contrast paints and how they virtually saved Games Workshop's bacon.
I did. That was a great clickbait video. I did watch the video.
But I mean, it was true though. In terms of, it wasn't just a clickbait title. It was genuinely true. It was like people are buying stuff, but they're getting frustrated that they can't get the models to look as good as the colour schemes on the box. That, you know, you sell a kid a £40, £50 box, you know, £80 box, whatever it is, the starter box costs now, and then you try and get the parents to buy a whole bunch of paints on top of that, and then the kid gets frustrated because, well, it doesn't look like the stuff on the box. You know, it's too hard to learn those skills quickly enough necessarily to get that kind of feeling of vindication from it. Whereas contrast paints, you can get stuff that looks as good as on the box straight away, pretty much.
I'm not sure quite as good as it looks on the box, or maybe that's just me.
Near as damn it.
But they are very good.
I mean, there's some excellent painting guides out there as well about using contrast paints.
One of the things I like about, it may not have been in that video, but Peachy talks about using there's another tool in your toolbox, which is definitely how I use them. I'm doing, some stuff is great with contrast, some stuff I much prefer building up colours.
Yeah.
Especially on bigger models.
Yeah, I can agree to that. I mean, I found that, and this is probably something that will be relevant for people who buy the Legions Imperialis set when it comes out, I found that for stuff like Epic, for example,
right,
contrast is brilliant, because for something that small, to get kind of the detail you want on it, if you can just spray it or undercoat it and then contrast it, and it takes on, you know, the look that you want, that's amazing. That's really, you know, worthwhile.
So I slap chopped 40 Night Goblins in basically half a day.
Yeah.
And that was all contrast paints. Well, actually, some of it was Army Painter stuff, but it's so fast. And they look fine, and I think for blocks of fantasy style blocks of infantry, just getting the models like 20 models together looks better than one really nice one if they all match and look kind of consistent. So
yeah, I'd agree with that.
So the mistake I made with the last one that I dry brushed was doing some other colours before I did the dry brushing, which made it much harder. So this time I'm just going to do the base coat, highlight all of the purple bits, and then do the other bits for them in.
Well, you said about doing slap chop. There was an interesting painting video that I saw Peachy doing last night. He was painting a Warcry miniature, and he basically slap chopped it to start with, did some washes and some contrast over the top, and then went back and layered over the top. But it really kind of did emphasise that whole using it as a tool in your toolbox rather than the only way to paint things.
There was another really good video, which I don't know when it was from their channel, with the guy from Artist Opus talking about just how he founded all his businesses and different stuff, but he also talked about a lot about highlighting, so I went, dry brushing. So I went back and watched some of their dry brushing videos, which I just learned a lot. I really like dry brushing in a for the right bits.
Yeah, I think it's got. I mean, you said when we were talking about doing this painting thing this evening, you said about you wanted some tips on basing, and dry brushing is a big part of how I do my basing. So we will definitely talk about that a little bit later on in this video.
So what are you up to now? So you're doing everything. I'd like to get a unit done. So you're doing
I've done
on everything.
All the grey on the metal. Because the grey is still drying on several of them, I've gone back and done the Wraithbone on the bits that are eventually going to get washed with the Tesseract Glow. So the bits that will essentially I want to pick up that kind of glow colour paint and just glow up. I'm now, again, because I'm still bored and waiting for things to finish drying, I am painting some of the bits that I know are going to be just jet black and then lay it over. So I'm doing stuff whilst I desperately wait for something to dry so I can dry brush the metal, because dry brushing is absolutely fantastic for when you're painting metallics.
And we were talking the other day about dry brushes, and I really like the round dry brushes, and you don't get on with them at all.
I don't know, I've used flats, so I've got a few of them here. I'll show them on the big close-up camera. So I've got a big flat dry brush, which is, I mean, the bristles are starting to wear out on that a degree, and then I've got a small flat dry brush, and I've also started experimenting with one of the synthetic dry brushes as well, although that's not holding up that well. It's kind of peeling slightly at the edges. I probably need to buy a new one. But no, I much prefer a flat dry brush. I prefer having a flat plane that I can drag along. I find the rounded ones, I just can't get on with.
So I started with the flat ones, with the unpainted flat ones, and I didn't get on with them at all. I also wrecked them by getting too much paint on them, so that didn't help. So I got some round ones a few weeks ago, and I love them. Really.
Yeah.
I guess it just depends.
It absolutely depends on your approach, to be honest.
Yeah. I think it depends on what you're doing as well.
So we were talking briefly about, you were saying about the history of the Eldar from your point of view. The big change now, Eldar gods, there was Cain, the laughing god. There is an entirely new Eldar god.
Okay, which I am unaware of.
Yeah, so it was during kind of I suppose what we think was the 40K end times, the kind when they brought back Roboot Guilliman and they kind of, Great Rift happened and all the major changes advanced the 40K narrative forward for the first time in decades. Yeah, they introduced the idea of the Inari, which is basically Eldar who worship a god of the dead. I suppose the Eldar didn't really have a god of the dead before, or if they did, that god of the dead is since dead. But the idea is that all of the Eldar spirit stones that have been inserted into the Infinity Circuit on all the different craft worlds are actually interlinked. All the Infinity Circuits are linked through the webway, and therefore all those Eldar souls are kind of communicating and are as one with each other. And the idea they came up with was that because we know that soul energy in 40K powers things like gods, like it powers the Golden Throne. The Emperor is constantly fed by a sacrifice of 100 psychers or 1,000 psychers, whatever it is, per day. Likewise, therefore, the Eldar could utilise that soul energy to empower an Eldar deity. And yeah, so the idea they had was that Eldar who decide to abandon kind of the worship of Cain and abandon the way of the craft world, and instead, from all sides of the spectrum, whether it's Harlequins, whether it's Dark Eldar, whoever, they would join together and form this new empowered psychic entity with the idea that that would help them vanquish the Chaos Gods. That essentially only a god of death can defeat the soul hunger of the Chaos Gods. And so that was kind of a new way of doing Eldar. They've never had their own army book as such. They've always kind of just been, they were in a background book that they did. But what's quite cool is that you can, if you're doing an not just for Idiot army again, then you can pick units from both kind of Craftworld Eldar and the Harlequins and the Dark Eldar and field them all together. Which I think is quite cool. And yeah, it was all part of a scheme cooked up by Eldrad Ulthwan to help defeat chaos. And there was a whole it was an army deal box set booklet that they did about that narrative element where he was trying to convince the humans to join forces with him and help defeat chaos. And the Imperium, being the Imperium, they of course decided to try and murder him instead.
Seems fair.
Yeah, exactly. Well, pesky Eldar, what else are you doing? But yeah, so that's kind of the major development in the Eldar background. I suppose since Krafel Altensar coming back out of the Eye of Terror, that's the next big change that they've made to the background for the Eldar, which is quite cool. I'm hoping that eventually what we'll get is the next big kind of thing for Eldar is that they'll actually release Exodites as their own box sets. Because they were a thing, I don't know if you remember back in the 2nd edition Codex, Exodites were a thing. They've never had official models as far as I'm aware.
No, which is why, so people would make their own, I guess.
Yeah, you could convert them out of Cold One riders and stuff back in the day. But yeah, supposedly there is a lot of hints that have been dropping that the next big kill team, much like they did Kill Team Gallowdank with the Space Hulk, as last year's or through into this year's Kill Team themed box set. There's a rumour that Exodites and kind of a Death World approach might be the next one. So we might get new Catachan models, new Exodite models, and stuff that lovely stuff you'd expect to find in a jungle, which would tie in nicely to the suggestion that that's partly why the Space Marine Scout box has gone away, because Scouts are still very much part of the Space Marines background, but you can't now get the models for them. And one theory is that a perfect venue in which you would expect to see Scouts is running around a jungle. So maybe they're going to get a new box, as they've done the same way they did Orc Commandos and stuff, as a Kill Team box, which would be quite cool. So I've got my Eldar army in the cabinet back there, which I'll show you later. And I keep meaning to add some of the cool Kill Team Corsairs to it, because they are really, really nice models. But I think Exodites in particular, if they released those, I would have to get a box of those, because they are such cool. They're like dragon riding space elves.
I mean, it sounds cool. So what are you up to? What was your next phase of painting?
I am dry now that the dark wash over the metal has darkened the metal. I am now dry brushing it bright silver again with Ironbreaker. So having darkened my metal, I'm now picking out the upraised surfaces to brighten the metal. Anybody who says that painting Necrons is easy, no, just lots and lots of washing and dry brushing metallics.
So I'm also dry brushing. We had a camera glitch for a few minutes. I went over my base coats again.
2 thin coats.
Second thinner coat, just because it wasn't quite looking bright enough. And now I'm on dry brushing with, what's it called, Scream of Pink, which is really close to the Galvorback Red. So it's very forgiving to dry brush over it because it blends really nicely. So
one of the nice things with a light dry brush is that you can almost kind of go back and just touch up a little bit with a layer brush if the colours are sufficiently similar.
Yeah. The next one, Pink Horror, is quite a big step up, so that one you have to be a bit more careful.
Are you still going to dry brush with that? That's not going to be like a layer edge highlight to finish it off.
So what I did on the one that I liked the best, this one, I very lightly dry brushed it and then edge highlighted some bits just to pick out some edges. I think I'm not great at painting. I can definitely do that better, but it works quite well. And it's fast, and I like getting them painted so they look good enough to use on the table.
Yeah, so that's the point. At the end of the day, the whole point of having them is to game with them. I mean, there are people who just paint to collect, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I mean, even I'm painting these things with the aim that I will play games with them. It's just I'm a bit of a pernickety perfectionist at times about how stuff comes out. I've never tried dry brushing an entire army. I've been tempted from time to time. Like there's the Night Haunts from Age of Sigmar. They lend themselves fairly well to just doing a base colour, a wash, and then a dry brush. But even then, I couldn't resist going back and like touching up models with a little bit of thin layer here. Oh, that'll look even better if I just give that a couple of thin layers. Maybe just another layer, maybe an edge highlight, and then I've painted 4 models in the time that somebody else would have painted an entire army. Still faster than Murray though.
So you've got your Tale of Four Gamers, which Murray is in for the painting.
Yeah.
You're now finished with your painting?
I I've just got to finish doing the final layer highlights on the squires from that.
I guess going back to what you just said.
Yeah, like I said, you know, I'm a perfectionist, and it's like, well, they are. I mean, I used them at our 5th edition event, and I used them in our 5th edition battle report, and they are perfectly good. You know, they've got multiple layers. They've already got like layers, shading, bases, and stuff on them, and they've been based already. It's just, if I had more time before we went up to Warhammer World, I would have done a few other little bits on it. Now that I have that time, I can be doing that. It's just I got distracted by Lord of the Rings miniatures and other miniatures and new ideas.
That Bretonnian army looks so nice though. You want everything to be up to the same standard.
Yeah, and that's the trick as well. I mean, I've got a whole bunch more Bretonnians and I've got to paint for it because at some point Bobby has agreed she's going to come down and we're going to play through the Circle of Blood campaign.
Oh, cool.
And before, because you and I still need to play through the Grudge of Drong one as well. Which will at least be helped by the fact that I'm painting a bunch of dwarves for my 6th edition army, which will be helpfully used in the 5th edition Grudge of Drong scenarios as well. But yeah, I've still got to finish off like an entire second unit of archers, some mounted yeomen, and a unit of 20 men-at-arms, and a knight on foot. Yeah, and a damsel on foot, because the character damsel that appears in the scenarios is a damsel on foot. She's not mounted. So I've still got a lot of stuff to do for that Bretonnian army. And I've actually got, sitting in some biostrip up there, I got a lovely gift. I'll put a short up about this at some point. I've opened the box and it came in. Somebody on Twitter sent me a very kind gift of the King of Bretonnia, the original Louis Leon Coeur model on his hippogriff that they had sitting in their bits box and didn't need anymore. Wow. And they just sent it to me out of the kindness of their heart. So it's sat up there in the biostrip, and I promised myself when I've got the other archers unit, the men-at-arms, the knight on foot, the damsel on foot, and the mighty yeoman done. So basically, all the other bits I wanted to add to the army done. Then I'm going to treat myself and paint that Louis Leon Coeur model, which is why he's currently sat in the biostrip to get ready for that.
One of the problems you've got, well, we've got, is every time we get together, we come up with about 5 video series ideas.
Yeah.
But that, I've just realised, also happens every time you meet everybody else.
Yeah, I get talking to people and go, oh, that'd be awesome, we could do a video of that, we could do a video of that. And then I'm painting Lord of the Rings miniatures and Age of Sigmar miniatures, and I've still got a day job. And I'm now painting the Tesseract Glow on that. That looks really cool. So that
does look cool.
Going to go back over and do the bits around the glow with black afterwards, which is going to be a nightmare because I don't want it to go over. But as it is, that Tesseract Glow, that's a really cool technical paint.
So I've got a small glow on the back of these for the power armour.
What did you use for that?
Using the Vallejo
fluorescent green. Something that's very similar. I think this is just slightly more,
kind of idea. Yeah,
it's a more yellow green than what you've got in the Vallejo paint. But they're still that same kind of the glowing colour. What I'm very, very fond of is on my Chaos Knights that I did for the Silent War last year, I got some glow-in-the-dark UV resin for their bases. So their bases, they're all kind of on these, you know, corrupted Mechanicus type boards, because that's eminently appropriate for corrupted Chaos Knights. But therefore, so all the bases are kind of mesh and rust and rubble and piles of kind of toxic goop. And the toxic goop's been done with this UV glowing resin. But what that means is if I leave them in direct sunlight for a while, then close up the cabinet at the end of the night, I can see where the knights are because their bases are glowing, which is quite cool. And revisit those at some point and add a couple more knights to them because they are beautiful, beautiful models. And I had a lot of fun stomping on things with them at Silent War last year. Speaking of which, are you going to have your Eldar ready for Silent War this year? It's looking like November time, maybe.
I haven't even considered that at this point. So we've got to get... So
you've got most of the stuff you already needed for the 6th edition game. You just got to get some practice games of 6th edition in.
I think so. I might need... So I've got... I think I can have 2... You can get so much more stuff in 6th. So I think I might need to fill out my unit of Silver Helms. I've only got 5, which...
Well, hopefully with Warhammer the Old World releases, they will release the Silver Helms box again, because they featured in some of the publicity photos for Warhammer the Old World. So that's a strong indication for my money that they're going to feature as a kit you can just buy again.
Probably, but probably not before October.
No, that may be the difficulty you've got. I mean, I've got some you can borrow. They're not
maybe
great painted, but that might be an option if you want to bulk it up to a full-sized unit. But what else were you planning on adding to your...
So the Dragon Princes, which got killed in every other game before I stopped using them. I think one of the problems I've had against your Bretonians is lack of mobility.
Yeah.
And so the armies I did well against, I could just sit back and shoot them and quite successfully kill them, whereas that's not working against.
And you know, that's quite so mobile as my knights.
Yeah, and so being too static is a problem. So plus the sixth, the cavalry are a lot cheaper. They
are. Well, units in general in sixth are a lot cheaper. But so I mean, Dragon Princes is our special choice, aren't they? Silver Helms, I think, are a core.
I think so, which is why I think it's helpful to have a big unit, and they don't have to have all of the armour, so they can be a bit faster.
True, you don't have to give them the full Thilmar Barney and everything to keep their movement rate up.
I considered that in fifth, but they're still so expensive in fifth that having them expensive and fragile is bad.
Yeah, I think in fifth, if you're going to take them, you want to take them. You want to actually kind of go with a beefed up version of it.
And you might as well, if you're going to have one unit, you might as well have Dragon Princes because they're the same price and a free banner. And half price magic as well. Free standard bearer, half price magic banner.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a no-brainer really to take Dragon Princes in fifth. But so okay, so and you've got a unit of Phoenix Guard that you've been painting, haven't you?
So I've got 15 of them. I've got 5 that I haven't made yet, but so I'll probably make them up to 20.
20 Phoenix Guard would be strong. I mean, you have a unit that causes fear, and to be honest, you stand a chance of outnumbering some units, especially some of my units. You kill a few models from my unit, you're going to be outnumbering me with fear causes, which leaves me no choice but to break and run.
And the Phoenix Guard are much better in 6th than 5th, which is why.
And they're 1 weapon skill 5, and they're strength 3 normally, but they're 4 with the halberd.
Yeah, I've read the rules for once for 6th. And they haven't but yeah. Phoenix Guard. I bought the Phoenix Guard for the 5th edition because I was hunting around on eBay for what models are available, and most things are available, but some of them are extortionate prices. So Phoenix Guards were, I could guarantee I could buy a unit of those because I could just buy them new. So I bought those, even though they're not, they wouldn't be the infantry I would choose in 5th.
No, not in 5th. You've got White Lions over Phoenix Guard in 5th, to be honest, because they're just that much better.
Yeah, so but the plastic Phoenix White Lions kit is completely unavailable.
At the moment, it's coming back for the old ones.
And you can buy the old metal ones at like £8.50 a model here and there, and they probably are good deals if you hold on, but it's like in the time pressure. So anyway, I bought a unit of Phoenix Guard, played them in our first game, didn't play them again because they're not very good, but in 6th they are good. I think in later editions they might be even better.
Phoenix Guard, they generally have just gotten better and better with each edition because they got all kinds of other like magic ward saves, magic resistance and stuff in later editions of it. They were, by the end of 8th, one of the best units in the Elven army. I'm going to change this really quickly because I've managed to get my dry brushing done. You'd asked about basing because you'd said when you did your models that the most you'd ever kind of had the experience of was doing the Goblin Green kind of...
Goblin Green and Flock, which is perfect for the 5th edition event.
Yeah, but not necessarily for what we're working on.
Exactly.
So I thought I'd show you some of the basing that I'd done on, for example, my little Hobbit miniatures I've been painting.
Yep. And
I thought I'd show you quickly how I do my basing now. So I've got here a couple of the texture paints. If you haven't picked these up, these are well worth a pick up. I'm going to use 2 different ones here. You can just use one. So I mean, that's just been done with Stirland mud, and then once it's dry brushed. I'm going to use a bit of the kind of sand-coloured Armageddon dust. And this is just a little kind of plastic spatula, basically. It's a texture shredder, they call it. But I'm going to just thunk some of this Armageddon dust down on it. It's basically paint with little microbeads of plastic in it. And then I'm going to cheat a bit. What I like to use is, this is the Grelin Earth, which is one of the crackling paints. So this is one of the ones that, after it's dried, it crackles out into kind of weird effects. And I like to mix a little bit of this in with my Armageddon Dunes, Armageddon Dust even, get it right. So that you get layers of it that are slightly different and kind of parched earth crackle in between the bits of the kind of sandy dust. But it's literally just a case of scoop it out, donk it on the base, let it dry, and then you can paint over it, you can wash it, you can dry brush it. I've seen people who've used things like the Valhallan Blizzard, which is the snow one, and they've let it, essentially because it's white, it's a white paint with microbeads of plastic in it. They've let it dry, and then they've painted it all kinds of wild and kind of otherworldly chaos colours to get weird looking bases. But my classic Necron army was originally done with the old way I learned to do basing when I was working at Games Workshop, which was sand and paint. You know, you use PVA and sand on the base, let it dry, and then paint over it afterwards. And I'm going to just try and kind of match that. So they were done as a desert style, but therefore this Armageddon dust and this Grellan earth mixed together will give that same kind of effect, I'm hoping. I've had some luck and some similarity on doing something like this with my Sisters of Battle when I'm basing them, so it'll be quite cool that my Necrons and my Sisters will be on the same bases, so that I can then fight out Sanctuary 101, refight it from the pages of White Dwarf, using the models that will match on the same bases. But what I found as a useful little tip as well is, I'm a collector of tufts. You can use static grass, and my Bretonians and my dwarves that I painted for my 5th edition armies were both done just using static grass and PVA. I just dumped some PVA on the base, either using a spatula or a brush, and then just got literally pinch of snuff some of the static grass and dunk it on the bases. But I really do like Games Workshop and a few other games companies make these little grass tufts that are basically just like a blob of glue with some static grass already stuck in it, and you can just put a little dollop of like PVA or super glue or something on your base and then ponk a tuft on. And what I like to do is I like to collect different types of tufts, so slightly different colours, different sizes. So this is, for example, like a big jungle tuft, and then these other ones are some of these little kind of small tufts that I got for doing my epic army. But I thought, when I was looking at the dwarves and the hobbits, I was kind of going, well, actually, I don't want it to be all just two big tufts, because it will make them look too small. Yeah. So I've put some of these smaller tufts on there, and I really like the effect. And much the same way with my Necrons, my plan is I'll probably put some kind of dead grass tufts on and some light kind of jungle tufts on, so you get some patches of dead grass, some patches of, you know, desert grass, and then I've got a big bag of essentially sea glass that I picked up at a garden centre. So that is broken bottles and jars that have just been rolled around in a tumbler. It's the same way that you'd get it if it had been rolled around at the tide line at the sea, but it takes all the sharp edges off, so you're not going to cut yourself when you're handling the model. But yeah, it was available as at a garden centre as potting material, the sort of thing that, you know, you could just put in the bottom of a plant pot to make the plant pot look pretty. And I just went, weird, mysterious green, glass. That'll look great with my Necron. So I bought
surprisingly close to the glow.
It does, yeah. I bought a big bag of it from a garden centre. I've still got tons of it left, and yeah, most of my Necron models end up with a weird glowing green crystal on their base as a result, which has worked out quite nicely.
Great.
Cool. Well,
I even have some of those tufts.
There you go, tufts. They're brilliant in terms of getting a great looking base really quickly.
So I'm on my, what's it called, pink horror highlight now. So
oh yeah.
I was telling Ben off camera, I think, I watched the Artis Opus dry brushing video the other day, and it has made a big difference to the quality of how this dry brushing has come out. I think
they're coming out really nice, and you've taught me something as well. The idea of essentially dry brushing the paint off again. I have a habit of dunking my dry brush in the paint water pot and just swirling it around, and apparently that really damages the dry brush, which, given the name, makes sense. Just dry brushing it against a slightly damp sponge to clean it off. I'm going to try that next time I buy a dry brush, so I don't ruin them all.
Yeah, I mean, that is a tip completely from that video, so you should...
No, thank you very much to the Painting Phase and Artis Opus for teaching Mike, who taught me.
Yeah, so anyway, so these are, in terms of where I am now, these are nearly done with the base coat, so these I'll probably edge highlight a little bit, and then do the other colours.
Cool. And I've done, I've done the dry brushing out over the metallics on the Necrons. I've painted the glow on there. I started basing one of them. I'll base the rest of them off camera. So the next stage for mine will be to start painting the flat colours on the armoured shells and do the white skull faces that my Necrons have. And then that unit of Necron warriors will basically be done. Which seems like an excellent point to end this. Well, I hope you've enjoyed just hanging out with us while we do a bit of a paint and a chat. Let us know, like I say, in the comments below if there's what you've been painting, hopefully, if you've been doing some painting while you're listening to us gossip on. And join us again for, hopefully, more random gossip and painting in the near future. Thank you very much for watching, and as ever, I will catch you next time. Bye for now.